Hello, everyone, and thank you. And I'm very excited at this panel, which is going to round off some of the really interesting things that we heard this morning from Channel 4, Sky, and Thinkbox just now. Hello to our wonderful panel this morning. I'm Omar Oakes, editor of The Media Leader. And so, we're going to have a chance to distill some of the things that we heard about this morning, as well as your own views about the opportunities that media buyers, planners, and media owners have in the ad-supported streaming universe, as we're calling it. So, let's kick off. What are the latest streaming TV ad tech and innovations that you're most excited about? I'm interested in putting yourselves in the shoes of media buyers as well as media owners. Alex, why don't you kick off?
Should we be doing intros or?
Yes, sorry, everyone introduce who you are, what you do, why you're here.
So obviously our names are on the screen, but we like an intro. So I'm Alex, I'm head of digital sales and innovation at Warner Brothers Discovery, which is the relatively new formed business, which is bringing together the Warner business, the Warner Media business, and the legacy Discovery, and the new sort of TNT Sports, which underpins BT Sport.
So what are you excited about in terms of innovations? Anything you've heard this morning, or just something you've been thinking?
I think there's a lot, right? I think there's we're a bit of a time of flex in the industry where I think we're running really fast and we're trying lots of things, and that brings a lot of innovation and a lot of opportunity. I think there's overlooked products which have been in market for a while, things like pause ads, that opens up a huge opportunity for that dual screening environment within CTV and your mobile and the home and the living room. But realistically, I think things like pod mediation, things like audience targeting, that the enrichment that brings at the moment, I think that we're able to bring within the CTV ecosystem is really exciting. The granularity we can go to, whether that should be targetable or used for insights is another thing, but the level of data we can get to from an audience perspective is really exciting in my view. But that pod mediation piece that I was just saying about, that's something that we're actively looking at. With CTV brings programmatic, and that programmatic supply, that brings challenges, that brings the ultimate need for the mediation of those advertisers to come through and build that optimal pod. With linear, ads are traditionally scheduled. With programmatic and CTV and on-demand, that's not necessarily always the case. So we're looking at an impression by impression scenario, and the mediation of that, whether that is based on interests, whether that's based on contextual, whether that's based on audience behaviors, insights, that's something that I think is a big piece for the industry right now.
Okay. And to Alex's left, we have Monet Bowie, who's from Samsung Ads, head of product marketing in Europe and APAC. What's exciting you right now?
I would agree with Alex. I think for me...
Don't agree, no agreement on this panel, Jay.
No, honestly, I think that while there's a ton of innovation, and we heard a lot about it this morning, what really excites me is that rich data sets that we're getting now. So with advancements in programmatic technology, we're really able to start to have more, as a media owner, more control, more access to data, to do things like optimize that consumer ad experience, and ultimately maximize the value of the inventory. I think that's what's really important. So, I mean, Alex touched on a couple of things, like understanding that optimal ad break length is really important, or being able to determine what is that minimum price you want for each second of your ad time. I think understanding that, being able to take that data and being able to really build a great consumer ad experience that not only maximizes your yield, but really provides something engaging and that's not disruptive. So I think that, combined with like the really rich data sets that we have today, I think that's exciting for media buyers, because they can now reach the right audiences at the right time in really relevant ways. And then at the same time, I think ultimately, if it works for the advertiser, then it's going to bring revenue for the publisher. So for me, it all roots into that data and the kind of advancements in technology that give us that.
Okay, I'm interested to bring in our next two panelists who might have slightly different views coming from different places in the market. To my left, Blair Robertson, CTO at Innovid XP. Innovid, coming at it from, I guess, what should media owners be looking at to maximize the value of inventory? I mean, what innovations out there are really catching your eye?
Hello, I'm Blair, Innovid XP. They should be making advertising attractive to brands. That's the way they should be selling more, selling more advertising. Matthew had a really great. I'm so busy in here. It's crazy. Matthew had a really great slide earlier on, if you're in one of the earlier presentations, where we had this kind of view of the whole ecosystem, and it was all the CTV players and SVOD and AVOD. And I think the most interesting and exciting thing is taking that whole thing and then wrapping a big, hug around all of it, and then adding on linear and all the different linear channels, and then being able to give a view for a brand, because while the sell side wants maximum share of wallet, brands tend to want some, variation. And brands have for a long, long time wanted a view of reach and frequency that covers everything. So for me, the fact that CTV can do that, and actually ACR can do it for linear, but it's a bit more messy. But having a view across everything means you can then manage frequency in a way that you couldn't previously. And that's, is frequency management really exciting? Actually, yes, it is, because it means we're being more efficient. And you can do it not just on the media level, but also on the creative and messaging level. So am I getting my message out at the right frequency across the market, across all the providers and all the players? That's really cool. And when you take that and add it to DCO, which this is a bit of a plug, but DCO being dynamic creative optimization means you can actively manage that in real time and make sure that people are seeing the right creative. So those two things together, I think, are super cool. They help the sell side because they make it much more attractive to the buy side, and that's going to drive more revenue for everybody.
Okay. And on your far right, my far left, Steph Janssen, who's Business Development Director at WPP's Finecast. What's exciting you? And as I've just heard these introductory remarks just now, I couldn't help thinking about that Coinbase ad from the Super Bowl last year, and how everyone thought it was so amazing. It was just a QR code, and it was going to lead to this wave of QR codes all over advertising, and it hasn't happened. Just what you think of that, as well as what's exciting you.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said around, we're an addressable TV business. We've spent the last 5 years kind of using data for targeting and measurement, and working with kind of retail and transactional data sets and all of that stuff. QR codes, yeah, I think there's something we've dipped our toe in. We've not had anything, I'd say, quite as impactful as the Coinbase ad in the Super Bowl, I have to admit. I think there's probably a kind of familiarity with that kind of interaction with a TV ad in the UK that still needs to be built, but I think it's an important first step in starting to think about kind of shoppable formats for TV. I think in terms of understanding the actual impact of that data and that addressability and targeting, we did a really interesting piece as part of our latest thinking inside the box research study, where we actually worked with UCL, took people, put them in fMRI scanners, and looked at how the brain responds to more targeted messages. So that basically to help advertisers validate the use of that data for targeting, and we saw some great results. So everything you'd expect: more attention, more emotional engagement, more memory encoding. And yeah, I think to Blair's point around creativity, that's something we're really looking at. So we've sort of spent 5 years optimizing the media placement with this data. There's now, thanks to the advances in technology, the opportunity to start optimizing the creative and actually delivering on that promise of addressable TV, so the right message to the right person at the right time. So yeah, I mean, QR codes are part of that creative format, but it's also, being able to personalize that message, that TV ad to the audience. And we might start small with that in terms of pre-optimized, and then with the vision, in the future, it's fully dynamic.
I want to get into that dynamic creative part, moving on to from a planning mindset in terms of the impact innovation is having. But before I do, just to pick up on that, what do you actually, so we talked about QR codes because I mentioned it, but in terms of, you mentioned the creativity that is maybe working in dynamic optimization. What are you finding from your study? What are the kind of top lines that might not be obvious?
I think we've found, so we did a piece of research. So we did the UCL piece, but before that we worked with Karen Nelson-Field's Amplified Intelligence and looked at attention to ads, and I think that was really interesting as well, just to see that people pay more attention when the message is relevant to them, as well as seeing all the kind of benefits in the brain encoding that we saw on the follow-up study. I think in terms of creative, it's trying to just make some kind of small optimizations to the ad at first that are going to make it more relevant to a segment of the audience. We're not really talking about one-to-one personalization that we'd see in digital, and then again having that measurement to validate those changes. But we're really early days on that. I think at the minute it might be just changing an end card or something as simple as that, or putting a frame around the ad with some kind of call to action, and then with the view that ultimately we can get into templated ads where we change the actual video creative in partnership with the creative capabilities that we have within the wider WPP organisation.
So that's really interesting. What do you think, Blair? It sounds like the biggest barrier to one-to-one optimization is cost.
Not necessarily. So we have done DCO for years. Honestly, the most popular way of varying creative is based on the weather and based on your location, because that means you can do regional targeting. But of course, there's the opportunity to do a narrative story. So if you're able to look at a journey where one viewer, one household, more realistically, because it's CTV, views across 10 different platforms, but the order they're viewing across all the platforms, you can tell a story. And that's pretty popular as well. You can add as much data as you want to do targeting. The cost comes in from the data more than the actual swapping out. Ultimately, as an ad server, all we do is serve this creative or that creative based on either some logic, some rules, or some data. So some data does have cost, but other than that, there's not an enormous financial barrier to doing it. Not all sell-side organizations accept a buy-side ad server, so that makes it more complicated because then you're inside the silo of one organization. But there's an enormous amount you can do with DCO, even above creative optimization, especially around frequency capping, because you can choose not to serve a commercial if you're already over frequency to that household. So lots happening. I don't think it's a barrier in terms of being more expensive. It can actually be cheaper because you sometimes don't serve something when you shouldn't. So there's a cost benefit as well.
Okay. So in terms of from a media planning aspect, I mean, Minay, what impact do you think SVOD advertising tiers are going to have on total reach, contextual targeting opportunities, beyond just, there obviously being more audience out there?
I think that's an interesting one, especially given some of the presentations we've seen earlier today as well. For us, I think what we're seeing is when it comes to subscription services, as they move and kind of scale out their ad-funded tiers, I do think that there's an opportunity for advertisers to reach an audience that may not have been accessible to them before. I don't think that we'll see a rush from all the subscribers to the ad-funded tiers, but I do think that we've seen a lot happen across the last few years that might help shift that migration a bit faster. So, for instance, the obvious thing is the economic climate right now. So people are reconsidering their subscriptions. The other thing that we're seeing is that consumers are just more receptive to ads nowadays. We commissioned a study with Verve, and that found that over 2/3 of consumers would watch ads in exchange for free content as long as it's relevant. And not only are we seeing it in the research, but we're actually seeing it in our data as well. So the caveat is it is on Samsung TVs, but within our universe, we saw an increase of viewership within AVOD increase by 150% since January 2020. So today we're seeing consumers spend about an hour a day in AVOD platforms on our TV. So I think if we look at the trends that we've seen in the AVOD space, we think about the climate that we're in now and how consumers can't afford to have these multiple subscription services. I think naturally that will give us not only a higher reach of the total audience, but I think potentially a new pool of audiences that weren't accessible before.
It was quite interesting. We had a report on the Media Leader today, in fact, about some data you might have seen from Antenna doing the rounds about early data on Netflix and Disney Plus subscription to the basic ads tier. And from a slow start, it seems to be like 1 in 5 of new subscriptions on Disney Plus and Netflix are the basic with ads. So it seems to be, to your point, more interest there. Alex, what do you think? I mean, obviously there's a total reach opportunity, but beyond that,
First thing is we are 100% ad supported with subscriptions, so they may be at 80 or a lower percentage, but we are at the 100%, which is one thing. But I think that if we just kind of take a step and think about what we were just talking about opportunities, this is one of the reasons I'm in this industry. This is why I'm excited about it, is that optimization, that trying new things, that innovation on the fly. And to give you a bit of context of kind of where we are now and where the opportunity is, I believe, is at Christmas, I took my 3 little girls to see Father Christmas, and they got a DVD each from Father Christmas. Great, we got a present. Daddy, what is this? Right? That is the state of where we are right now. So where we are going to be is a very exciting opportunity, and the new generations coming through aren't going to have the battle that we are having now about where do we put the eyeballs, where do we put our content. It's just the evolution of where we're going to be. And SVOD plays a huge role in that. We are the very early days of that, and yes, there is that confusion for consumers around where do I put my money, especially with the state of the economy. But that's where the innovation of the likes of Sky, for example, how they bring multiple apps and subscription services together under one portfolio. There is this opportunity now about how do we bring everything together, and I think we're trying to solve that. Yes, there's a total reach, and if you took isolation and said, right, you've got fast, you've got linear, you've got SVOD, you've got AVOD, every piece of that plays its role in reach. The same as you do with web, right? You have a number of different ad formats on a website. SVOD, AVOD, linear, it is the same scenario, just in a slightly different environment. It doesn't mean one size fits all, and that's why every single piece has its role on a media plan.
I want to pick up on the last presentation, which was interesting when the graphic with time spent on different platforms. And maybe we should be talking more about Twitch. I hadn't actually prepared for this, but I'm interested in kind of when we look at AVOD, SVOD, broadcaster VODs. Should the buy side anyway look at those as equals in terms of opportunities, or do some maybe have bigger halo effects than others? You smiled as soon as I said that, Alex. I know you have a view.
But that's pretty much what I was saying just now, right? Is that everything has an opportunity and everything has a role. It depends on the environment of whether you're leaning in, whether you're leaning out. With SVOD, it's more lean in. You're selecting to view. You're paying for that subscription. You're there because you really, really engaged. Arguably, is linear all the way the same as that? Maybe, maybe not. There will be some platforms that have a great halo effect, and I think that's where we are right now. Is as an industry, we're trying to bring everything together. As advertisers and agencies, it brings challenge. There's huge amount of diversity, and I think we're trying to solve that now. Is where is that opportunity? Where is that halo effect? Where should a ad be very optimized to the moment, to the ID? But where should it be more generic and more open and more sort of lean back?
So that's the Warner Brothers view. What's the Finecast view, Steph, in terms of different forms of video on demand? Does one have a bigger halo effect than others?
I think for now, and given the scale of some of them, there's enough commonalities in them to kind of sort of bucket them together for reach. You know, professionally produced long form content. Today, fairly similar ad formats in terms of ad length and kind of ad pod structures. I think there's a lot to pick apart in the nuance in the longer term, though. So, I mean, just 3 things you could think about would be the kind of attention levels that I touched on for different formats. I touched on the sort of study that we started to do in that space. The reach that you're getting, and I think there's probably 2 parts within that. So there's the kind of audience differences between those platforms. So Fast, for example, is a fairly similar structure to linear. So maybe that's a substitutional kind of older audience, whereas when Thinkbox talk about the reach extenders, who are that sort of 3rd to 5th decile of linear viewers, that tends to be a younger upmarket skew of audience. And then I think another thing is kind of to your point, Alex, is around the need states of why are people watching that form of video. So again, Thinkbox and MTM did something that was about 5 years ago now that looked at the 8 different need states of video, and it might be that Fast is more that unwind, lean back. I just want, to let, Gordon Ramsay's kitchen nightmares just sort of wash over me while I de-stress from the day versus, sitting down appointments of you drama on Netflix. And that, because that's a different need step, that will have a different outcome for advertisers potentially. So I think loads of really exciting research to do in the sort of medium to long term. But yeah, I think for today, just as a start, their incremental reach to kind of traditional TV, and if we can start to measure that, that's a good starting point.
Blair, do you agree? Disagree?
I think Halo is really another word for memory, like how much are we remembering it, and that's really driven by the weight of the advertising. So did you see it? Was it 1 second? Was it tiny? And that's kind of comparable across all the different platforms. And then there's the other part is how relevant it was, and that's kind of up to the advertiser. So I'm not sure. So I think broadly they are in line, but I think how much Halo there is down to good media planning and good messaging and good creative. More than a massive difference between AVOD and TV. There is a difference, but there are second order effects driven by, weight. And we've got a proxy for this already. It's called cost per thousand. I mean, that's co-viewing, rarity of media, and then the weight. That should factor into the cost per thousand or the overall amount you're paying. And the game, of course, for each side is to use the information asymmetry and for the buy side to make sure what they're paying is getting more value than paying for the CPT, and the sell side to make sure they're selling it at the most premium value. So no, short answer, I don't think there's a huge difference, and if there is a difference, it's something that you can influence.
I'm going to slightly disagree with one point there that you meant. You mentioned that it's on the advertiser about whether it's relevant. I would say it's not. It's on us as media owners. It's on us that are actually placing the ads into the stream to make sure that ad is relevant. If I'm watching a piece of motoring content, I probably don't want high heels ads. I might want an ad that's based on my interests or behaviours at that time. And if we had multiple ads available, we should select the most relevant one.
So, don't disagree. My original point was that in order to sell more, we should make advertising attractive to brands. Yeah, so that works for your point. Would you say then that in it's a lot of direct IO buying right now for CTV? Would you suggest that if we move to a more programmatic space, we're actually going to say the sales executive say we're not going to serve this ad because we don't think it fits the context and it's better for you if we don't? Would that be a reasonable
I think that's an opportunity. Yeah, I think don't get me wrong, we're all in this game for the advertising dollars, right? That's what we're bonused against, that's what we're targeted on. But yes, that sort of mediation of ad pods, yes, the programmatic supply, the diverse supply allows for that opportunity. It's not necessarily always a rejection. It may be a rejection for that user at that time in that pod.
I mean, ultimately, I agree. I think anything we can do to make the market fairer, and Innovid very much for fair markets, because that benefits the buy side and the sell side. We represent both. The better. I don't think we're there yet. I'm not sure of any environment where you've got an SSP saying we're not going to serve this because we don't think it's really good for your brand. The brand could be a bit pissed off. But yeah, why not?
Well, as Alex said, I think most of us in this room are in it for the ad dollars or pounds or euros. Steph, where for this increasing these ad dollars that are going onto AVOD, for example, where are the budgets coming from?
I think there's obviously a natural shift as TV viewing shifts, and I think we saw earlier potentially that hasn't kept pace with changes in consumer behaviour to date. But I think also it feels there's a big opportunity for digital budgets as well. So I think there's a few things in that. I think there's the deprecation of cookies and the restrictions on identifiers that levels the playing field for TV a little bit more. I think in the digital space there's been a shift from display to video, and now kind of CTV is a bit of the kind of buzzword in the digital space. And when we talk about connected TV at Finecast, we tend to talk about devices, and then we know all the sort of formats we've been speaking about within those. But yeah, I think that creates an opportunity for addressable TV to start taking some budget from those spaces, and we've done studies looking at some of those middle to lower funnel objectives with clients and seeing some really good results. So things like 25% uplift in online orders on one client, or 6.5% uplift in sales when we used retail data for an FMCG in store. So I think the fact that we can also start using that data to demonstrate how the performance of TV stacks up is positive. And you know, TV as a medium has historically been great at delivering hard metrics like sales. Yes, it does a brilliant job of branding, but it also delivers sales. And I don't think addressable TV is any different. It can drive response, it can drive brand, and because of the changes in legislation and policies, I guess, by the tech companies in the digital space, it actually creates a level playing field where we can stack these channels up side by side and see and judge it on performance. And I think TV's well placed on that.
Monet, you referenced before just the huge amount of data you're now getting from the television sets. Does that give you an indication of where budgets are coming from in terms of where you see the growth in AVOD that you referenced before?
So I think in terms of the data, we're definitely seeing the shifts. I'd say it's kind of dangerous to make these like overarching assumptions though, and I think it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where the budgets will come from, or just say that as a prediction, because what I think we can expect is that we'll continue to see viewership fragment. So we know that that's going to happen, and I think as a brand, you need to follow where those audiences are. And I think it you know, we're seeing really positive things as an agency. You know, we've got as an industry, we've got agencies that are creating these advanced TV groups, or, you know, total TV teams. And so they're now tasked with understanding what's happening across these different platforms. And I think that these are really great developments moving us forward to start to understand how to best optimize those budgets. But I will say, Stefan, one thing you just touched on is the danger of sometimes grouping everything together is then assuming that they're the same. And so I do think that, you know, as agencies or as media owners, we do have to continue to educate marketers that, yes, we need to think about TV holistically, but they're very different and they're nuanced, and consumers use them for different things. So whether it's the context that Alex flagged around lean back or lean forward, the content itself, is it long form, is it short form, that impacts the consumer ad experience. And then the ad format itself, so, you know, is it skippable, is it non-skippable? All these things, I think, come to play, and ultimately, I think what will happen is, if we're following the consumer and we understand where they are, how they're using the platforms, that will ultimately determine, you know, where the budgets are coming from and where they're going to, but for a very specific advertiser versus like a general trend.
Blair?
It's hard to disagree. I mean, the budgets should come from a nicely thought out, evidence-based analysis into where the audiences are. And I think this is quite different in the US, which is where a lot of my experience is, to the UK. In the UK, brands still rely very heavily on agencies for direction. In the US, they tend to be more for buying. But I think, you know, bigger organizations which still have historical siloed media buying teams, where it's still legacy linear TV and digital, the money could come from. It really depends on the brand. I don't think there's one answer to this. Ultimately, it should, you know, we like to think of marketing organizations as being customer centric, and we think about the customer, we follow the journey, and then we do some big analysis and we work it out. But the reality is not that in many places. It's a bun fight around a room with a linear person shouting at the digital person for budget and arguing about whatever attribution methodology has been put in front of them and telling them it's wrong. That's the reality. So it depends on the organization, depends on the maturity. I think some of it's coming from linear, probably more coming from linear. I'd like to think it's coming basically based on where the audiences are. Not sure we're there yet, but hopefully at some point, but I can't really disagree.
Thank you. And same question for you, Alex, but you have to give us chapter and verse on how it breaks down from Discovery Plus versus HBO Max, etc., where the budget's coming from.
Let me give you every detail. No. I completely agree with everyone else. I think it's quite interesting. Like, if we take our our business in the UK and Ireland, we kind of look at how we're set up. We don't have a linear sales team and an AV sales team or streaming sales team and then a digital sales team, then a social we have a sales team. And the way that we tend to work would be exactly kind of how we're all talking, is the fact that it's almost down to the agency and advertiser to kind of make the decision of where the budget comes from. So the way that we would say is, here's the activation, here is the opportunity, this is everything we can do. You tell us how you want to activate, you tell us which budget you want to use. And it's hugely different from agency to agency to agency and from advertiser to advertiser. And we're seeing that across the board. We've seen social budgets come our way, and we can thank Elon Musk for that, with what he's doing with Twitter. We've seen linear budgets come to us. We've seen online video programmatic budgets come for us. And that's, I think, shows the opportunity of what's there. And I think some advertisers and agencies would look at it as, great, big screen advertising, I'll give you my big screen budget. Others will say, great, I can do targeting and programmatic, so here's my programmatic budget. So I think we're in sort of a huge change around how, as an ecosystem, it's all traded, and that is quite exciting.
Okay, just a few minutes left. I wanted to ask about measurement. If you were around for the Sky panel, you would have heard interesting discussion about sea flight, about how that is developing, and the point was well made that advertisers are demanding better cross-platform measurement. How should marketers approach this, Monet?
So firstly, I agree with what's been said today. I think there's been huge advancements in this space. So, all the initiatives that were discussed, Barb, Seaflight, Project Origin, earlier this month, YouTube announced their own principles that they're suggesting for the market. So there's definitely a need for a standardized approach to how we measure and a common currency. So I think that goes without saying. In the absence of having that standardization today, I do think that there's a lot of great innovation that's happening. And although it's in silos, I do think it gives marketers more insights to start to piece those puzzles together. So as an example, the Innovid XP, obviously, that Blair works on, at Samsung, we've got our own automatic content recognition technology, which has a view on our ecosystem. So we understand what that viewership is happening across linear, streaming, and gaming for us. So as I said, I think it's in the absence of something where you can have consistency, having those different pieces and being able as a marketer to say, if this is where I'm investing, what's the view of that world? I know it places a little bit of a burden on them to kind of have to bridge the gaps between those silos, but I do think it's effective. As an example, we ran a campaign with Vodafone in the UK. They were looking to reach heavy streamers and gamers who were using like high bandwidth internet. And they had a really, really great TV campaign. The challenge for them is that they were reaching, they had amazing exposure on those heavy linear viewers, but they found it challenging to reach those light linear viewers. So I think in that example, using data, using inventory to be able to start reaching audiences you're not able to reach, they were able to reach an additional 320,000 homes, which I think 12% incremental reach isn't something to kind of laugh at when we're looking at these numbers. So I think as we work towards more standardization, there are still tools that marketers can use today.
Before I ask the other panelists to respond to that, I want to do my second plug this morning for the Media Leader. We have an op-ed by Justin Sampson, who's the CEO of Barb, talking a bit more about why Barb are doing this Fit for TV standard for TV audience measurement in the UK, where they are obviously looking, they've got Netflix, they've got Disney on there as Barb subscribers, but clearly they're also starting to measure YouTube, currently only broadcaster content on YouTube. And as that universe expands, the quality benchmark for now is Fit for TV. I wondered what the panel thinks about that. Monet, first of all, what do you think about those sorts of benchmarks? How, going forward, we heard in the ThinkBox presentation about Twitch being incredibly popular among one young cohort. Is that tenable for the foreseeable future?
I think it is something we have to consider, because I think the content itself, as I said earlier, like long form, short form, the type of quality of it does impact the effectiveness of the ad. And I think it's less about saying which one is better or worse, but it's recognizing that each plays a different role. So I think having those classification makes a lot of sense. I will say, as an example, we've been hearing around what's that common denominator? And I mentioned earlier, YouTube, they've suggested using the MRC's definition of viewability. Now, that definition says you need 100% viewability for 2 seconds consecutive. But if you think about who would meet that, it's everyone. Like, it could be linear TV, it could be YouTube, it could be like a floating, like in-banner video that's traveling with you as you're reading an article. Now, the ad experience for that is just so different, and how a consumer would engage with that is so different. So I think these, being able to create things like Fit for TV and starting to define them and carve out those nuances is really important if what we're trying to do is go beyond just reach and frequency and thinking about impact and effectiveness.
Steph, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we're in quite a privileged position as a kind of single point of access to the addressable TV ecosystem. So we work with all the major UK broadcasters as well as our AVOD partners. So we've had a total TV measurement solution in the market for around 2.5 years now, which we combine with linear TV to give the total TV reach and frequency measurement. But I think, yeah, to your point, what's interesting now is we're looking at, well, if we start to add in video outside of that Finecast ecosystem, how do we account for that? And I think you're right that the MRC standard is one benchmark, but actually those video views are quite different. So we've been looking at some research that looks at the awareness uplift for different formats, platforms, devices, and how we can incorporate those factors so we can kind of equalize those views a bit and hopefully give advertisers a kind of truer picture of their effective reach. But it obviously becomes quite complicated to do that. But we've done some initial tests and the results have been quite good in that video has been incremental reach to our ecosystem, but also we're conservative, I guess, about what it's adding based on the views in those environments and how different they are to TV.
Blair, I know you have views on this.
MRC has been doing very good work for a very long period of time. And we need standardization. It doesn't matter where it comes from. It's got to be as consensus as possible. One of the things that there really isn't any standardization for right now is overlap, so incremental reach, which is really where a lot of the value from measurement comes from. It's not as reach and frequency, it's the overlap between different platforms. We also have holistic total video measurement. I guess the difference in ours is that we don't sell any media, and it doesn't stop at a particular wall. It's everything, and it's very, very granular in terms of the impression data sets we collect, which means that we're able to do overlaps. And for us, overlaps are an outcome. How much overlap you have between two different platforms, that is an outcome because it's a measure of wastage or efficiency, in the same way as web activity and apps and in-store shopping. These are all outcomes too. So when I'm planning or optimizing, it's based on how I get the best reach and frequency, considering where the overlaps are. And I would like to see some standardization there in measurement. It doesn't exist yet. Maybe we'll end up helping push that forward.
Before we wrap up and have our coffee break, does anyone have any questions or comments for this panel?
In talking about that shoppable space and talking where we were talking earlier about the online budgets, how would you approach the conversation when you've got a marketing team who are looking for quick results? And knowing in that mobile space, they can very quickly see that there was a link clicked, rather than looking at on the connected TV where you're having to use the QR code, the second screen. How would you approach that conversation with them about where the value is in that big screen versus
Blair, do you want to say that? Thank you.
So you don't have to use QR codes to do shoppable. You can do attribution in real time across platform for linear and in CTV. We've been doing it for years and years and years. So I would say, here's the results. It's just the same as digital. You can do it cross device. You can do it in real time. It's not. You do not need to be able to do a QR code to click a shoppable ad. That works. I'd say that technology is a little bit old-fashioned almost. We've got pretty good machine learning models now that can say this video, whatever video it is, this is a product in the picture that already exists as well. So I think with a conversation, it's a non-issue, honestly.
Okay.
And just at the back, if you wouldn't mind bellowing, say your question.
Platforms now discoverable on smart TVs, but how does an advertiser determine that something's actually TV content?
Yeah, it's something actually we're looking to explore again in that Think Inside the Box research series. So this year's thing is looking at that question, because it's something we looked at 4 or 5 years ago and started to see some shifts in how particularly young audiences define TV. But I think 5 years on, it'll be really interesting to see what they think now. I think at the minute we're still, professionally produced, regulated, long form content is our definition of TV. Obviously, Barb have just kind of launched a slightly new definition to incorporate some of these wider video areas, which is a positive thing. But I think, yeah, for advertisers at the minute, they're looking into other video platforms, but I still think they have a more traditional sense of what TV is, and that's kind of the space that we operate in today.
Thank you, panel. Thank you for your questions. Please have some coffee. Thank you very much. Thank you.